for Christmas is a little bit of music. All I want for Christmas is a little bit of music. Santa, won't you bring my twisted...
The 1960s are remembered for the Vietnam War, civil rights protests, the assassinations of U.S. President John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr., the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the first time a man stepped foot on the moon. It is a complicated decade filled with civil and national unrest, societal change, and of course, the Beatles. The decade brought a renewed appreciation for natural materials, due to the rise of environmentalism that focused on the preservation of wilderness areas and other sustainable practices. An awareness between environmental problems and the human society was a rising focus of the era. For example, the publication of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring in 1962 emphasized the correlation between pollution and human health. The rise of environmentalism certainly brought certain fads into the Christmas season. For example, home magazines encouraged people to hang fresh apples from their trees instead of ornaments, and to use dried fruits and nuts as centerpieces. Christmas cards showed scenes of wilderness settings, and one of the most popular cards of the decade featured a deer in the snow. In this episode, we want to celebrate the decade's movement to embrace nature. We're going to be making a black walnut sponge cake, and as a bonus, show you how to make a beautiful centerpiece using fallen branches found in your backyard. This black walnut sponge cake recipe was found in a Suburbia Today article from November 1962. It was the dessert suggestion for a dinner made for a VIP. We accessed this recipe through using the newspaper microfilm in our microfilm reader, which also allows us to digitize materials. As we went through the newspapers from the 1960s on the microfilm, we were able to see what local merchants were doing uptown and in Westerville. This gives us a peek at what the people in Westerville were doing during the holiday season, as well as what merchants were trying to sell.
Come on. All I want for Christmas is a little bit of music. All I want for Christmas is a little bit of music. Santa, won't you bring my twisted record today? E-oh, round and round, up and down we go.
This 1962 black walnut sponge cake recipe would have made a great addition to a holiday dinner. The recipe says to use an ungreased pan, but I would highly recommend greasing it. I didn't grease mine following the recipe, and it didn't turn out exactly as planned, so I would highly recommend using a cooking spray. This craft activity was taken from a book checked out at the Westerville Public Library called A Very Vintage Christmas. For this activity, you'll want to get glitter or sequins, Mod Podge or some sort of glue, a brush to make it easier to put the Mod Podge on, and some sticks that you find in your yard. This activity can get pretty messy, so you want to make sure that you put newspaper down and protect the surface that you're working on. I've put mine as a centerpiece with some nuts and a deer to go with the 1960s theme. Thanks for watching Yuletide Treats. We'll see you next week when we travel back to the 1970s and make something delicious from that era.